Welcome to the Forgotten Narrator. There is a moment in the Warhammer 40,000 universe when you stop asking how much suffering exists and start asking how anything but suffering could survive. It is a galaxy where agony is not merely a tool of war or control, but an entire language spoken fluently by every race, every faction, every twisted god, and broken soul. Pain, in the grim darkness of the far future, has become so fundamental that it transcends flesh. It lives in the spirit. It breathes through rusted machines, chants from blood-soaked altars, and echoes in the hollow psyches of those who once believed in peace. This is not a world of momentary cruelty or tactical intimidation. It is a place where torture is ritualized, perfected, sanctified. Some do it to survive, others do it for pleasure. Many do it because they no longer understand any other form of expression. The horror of Warhammer 40k lies not just in the blood and chains, but in the fact that even the innocent have learned to scream beautifully. There is no end to the inventive ways the Imperium of Man can torment a body. For all its grand cathedrals, vast armies, and divine rhetoric, the Imperium is at heart a machine of control, and torture is one of its most ancient, finely honed cogs. Yet unlike the wild sadism of chaos or the refined malice of the Drakari, imperial torture is bureaucratic, clinical, and terrifyingly normalized. It is not only permitted, it is expected. The moment you are born beneath the two-headed eagle, you are one heartbeat away from agony. Among the most disturbing forms of state-sanctioned torture is the transformation of heretics and criminals into servitors. The process is not quick, nor painless. Flesh is torn away, nerve clusters exposed and rewired. Minds are broken down chemically and reassembled only enough to allow obedience. Servitors are not executed souls, they are shattered ones, imprisoned in mechanized bodies to live out their days performing degrading, often fatal tasks. Imagine standing silently for centuries in a freezing void ship corridor, never blinking, never thinking, while your inner voice begs for death. Then there are the confession engines of the Adeptus Arbites, massive machines that blend ancient torture devices with advanced psychofeedback technology. These constructs scrape through your memories like scalpels, forcing victims to relive their worst moments while amplifying guilt and shame until confessions erupt from their throats, whether real or not. Some even confess to crimes that they could never have committed, just to make the pain stop. The Arbites don't care. The Emperor's justice demands sacrifice, not certainty. In the labyrinthine dungeons beneath hive cities and black ships, the Adeptus Mechanicus push the limits of anatomical cruelty. To the tech priests, flesh is an error to be corrected. Subjects are dissected alive not out of malice, but as holy study. Neural interfaces are drilled into skulls without anesthetic, entire spines are extracted and replaced with servospines, and screams are converted into data. There is no distinction between a machine's malfunction and a man's suffering. It's all just information. But perhaps the most horrifying is the penitence architecture itself, the invisible scaffolding of societal torment. Imagine being sentenced to the treadmill penitence, where prisoners are shackled to giant gears that power a hive's underbelly. They march in chains for years until their legs rot away, at which point they are replaced with bionic limbs and forced to march again. Or worse, the sunblind penitents who are sent to the surface of irradiated death worlds with a single instruction: survive long enough to return and receive absolution. Few ever do. The Imperium also revels in psychological punishment. Heretics and suspected traitors are often subjected to endless isolation in pitch-dark oubliettes, where sensory deprivation births hallucination and self-destruction. Some cells broadcast distorted hymnals day and night until inmates begin tearing at their ears to make the Emperor's voice stop. For psychers, the torment is infinitely worse. Constant exposure to psychic dampeners, brain-piercing blackstone spikes, and soul-muffling collars that dull the warp but amplify despair. Even civilians are not exempt. Planetary governors might enforce flagellation quotas or issue loyalty tests requiring families to denounce one another. On shrine worlds, pain is often seen as piety, with entire communities participating in blood marches, crawling on flensed knees through razor-wire paths in hopes of redemption. The line between devotion and damnation becomes indistinguishable. In this way, the Imperium does not simply use torture, it builds with it. Cities are erected on the backs of screaming laborers. Data is extracted through agonized minds, justice is enacted with flame and flare. And the result is a population too broken to rebel, too afraid to question, and too traumatized to dream. Torture is not a punishment in the Imperium. It is a process, a policy, and a prayer. And the most terrifying part is how utterly normal it has become. There is a special kind of horror reserved for those who fall into the hands of the ecclesiarchy. Unlike the cold efficiency of the Arbites or the mechanized cruelty of the Mechanicus, the ecclesiarchy tortures with sanctity. They do not see suffering as a means to an end. They see it as a ladder to salvation. Pain is proof of devotion. Agony is the anthem of the faithful. And to the fanatical zealots of the imperial creed, there is no more sacred act than burning the sin from a soul, one screaming breath at a time. Among the most iconic of the ecclesiarchy's tortures is the use of fire, not as a weapon, but as a divine purifier. Burning alive is seen not as execution, but as anointment. Pyres are lit in the thousands, often in public squares, where accused heretics are doused in sacred oils and set alight, while hymns roar from cathedral speakers. The faithful gather not to mourn but to celebrate, raising their voices in chants while the condemned are transformed into cinders of purity. Some scream for minutes, others, drugged and gagged, convulse silently in the flames. Either way, it is a spectacle of purification, not mercy. But fire is only one of many tools in the ecclesiarchy's vast arsenal of ritual pain. Within the chambers of the Adepta Sororitas, the Sisters of Battle, flagellation is a daily rite. Not only for prisoners, but for themselves. Barbed whips, penitent scourges, and flesh hooks are used to tear open skin in the name of spiritual vigilance. For prisoners, this becomes an ordeal of forced piety. Kneel before the reliquary, recite the litany of the wounded saint, and receive lashes for each syllable you mispronounce. Those who cry out are struck again, for a true believer embraces the pain without complaint. The Sisters Repentia represent perhaps the most vivid embodiment of this agony as faith doctrine. Once full-fledged warriors, these fallen sisters undergo brutal trials of redemption that involve self-mutilation, sensory deprivation, and relentless psychological beratement. They are stripped of armor, dressed in nothing but scripts of purity, tattooed into their flesh, and hurled into battle with massive eviscerators as a form of living penance. But before they even reach the front lines, they must endure days of torment from their fellow sisters, chained fasting, bone-piercing trials, forced visions of their sins through psychotropic incense. This is not just punishment, it is a purification of being. Even the youth are not spared. The Scala Progenium trains orphans of imperial officers to become the next generation of commissars, sisters, and stormtroopers. The training includes ritual beatings, psychological humiliation, and mandatory pain endurance tests. Children are made to walk barefoot across sanctified coals or sleep suspended from ceiling hooks by their arms. If they cry, they are called traitors. If they faint, they are dragged back and forced to begin again. They learn to equate agony with progress and silence with strength. The result is soldiers who fear shame more than death. In more esoteric corners of the ecclesiarchy, such as the Ordo Hereticus, psychic tortures are laced with spiritual intent. Psychers are ritually scourged with soulfire whips or made to face living effigies of their sins, constructs built from the memories of those they have harmed. These tortures break not just the body but the soul. Confessions are not coaxed. They are ripped from the spirit, then written in blood and burned as holy text. Those who survive are often left mentally shattered, considered purified only because they have nothing left to defile. Pilgrimage itself becomes a form of torture, sanctioned by the Church. On certain shrine worlds, penitent pilgrims crawl for weeks across glass deserts, carrying burdens carved from ceramite and adorned with relics. Others are chained in groups and made to chant continuously without sleep, collapsing from exhaustion as their minds begin to dissolve. The faithful call it devotional disintegration, the holy unraveling of ego through pain. Inquisitorial confessionals embedded within ecclesiarchy facilities are perhaps the most terrifying rooms of all. Inside, sinners are locked into biomechanical thrones that inject sedatives, hallucinogens, and neural agitators. While their minds burn with torment, holographic images of saints and martyrs are projected around them, weeping, accusing, bleeding. The psychological pressure alone breaks most within hours. Those who do not confess are considered truly damned and are dissected alive for the purity of data extraction. Yet the most chilling aspect of ecclesiarchy torture is not the pain itself, but the smiling faces of the torturers. They do not scream or sneer. They sing, they weep holy tears, they whisper prayers while they flay. Because in their minds, they are saving you. Even as your flesh peels from your bones, even as your soul fractures under divine pressure, they believe, truly devoutly, that they are giving you a chance to be reborn in the Emperor's light. And the terrifying part? Sometimes, the victim believes it too. In the shadows of the Imperium's towering cathedrals and forge worlds, there is an institution that does not flinch at the line between truth and torment. It redraws it entirely. The Inquisition is not just an organization. It is a doctrine, a psychological weapon, and a living, breathing enforcer of survival at any cost. When an inquisitor comes knocking, there are no rights. There is no mercy. There is only a question that demands an answer. How much of your soul are you willing to destroy in the name of truth? The tortures of the Inquisition are more than tools. They are philosophies. They are acts of revelation. And to those who wield them, pain is not about extracting information. It is about unmaking the self until only the truth remains, or until the truth becomes irrelevant because the heretic has been made so empty that they can no longer lie. Interrogation begins with the classics, of course. Iron maidens modified with psychic conductors, bloodletting pits that use anticoagulant incense to prolong suffering, suspension frames that rotate and twist limbs beyond recognition. All of it sanctified, recorded, and databanked for future use. But these are mere opening acts. The real horror begins when the mind becomes the target. Inquisitorial psychotorture is a horror unique to 40k. Victims are injected with neurostimulants that make every nerve scream with memory. Not pain, necessarily, but the feeling of regret, guilt, loss, and longing amplified to unbearable levels. Then the confessions begin. Not because the subject remembers their crimes, but because they cannot endure their imagined sins. The brain folds in on itself. Innocence becomes irrelevant. The Inquisitor doesn't want to know if you're guilty. They want to see if you believe you are. Psychers endure perhaps the worst of all. Their minds are subjected to warp-null fields that strip away the comforting madness of the immaterium, leaving only raw, naked consciousness. Some Inquisitors employ mind scourers, daemon-infested relics that latch onto a victim's psyche and dredge out thoughts like rotten teeth. Others use a technique called memory drowning, where false recollections are implanted and then removed violently, leaving the subject unable to distinguish real trauma from fabricated. Eventually, the subject breaks not with a scream, but with a prayer. There are tales of truthwalkers, invisible demons bound into humanoid constructs that respond only to lies. When interrogated in their presence, every falsehood is met with unbearable pain, neural fire that cascades through every joint and pore. The terrifying part is that even mistakes trigger the response. Victims begin to fear their own thoughts, questioning whether anything they believe is real. Some die of shock before the questioning even begins. The Inquisition also wields something far worse than physical or mental torment: isolation. Entire cells are suspended in null space, where time moves differently. Days become years. Silence becomes thunder. In one case, a heretic was locked in a time-shifted vault for a week of real time, experiencing over 2 centuries of solitude, hunger, and internal collapse. When the door opened, he wept in gratitude. Not for his release, but for the privilege of being questioned again by another human voice. Even worse is the practice of recursive confession, a looped interrogation wherein the subject is tortured into confessing, then memory wiped, then tortured again for the same crime, without end. The record grows, the guilt deepens, the soul withers. The Inquisitors call it truth refinement. The accused calls it nothing. They've long since forgotten language. Sometimes the torturer is not even human. Some Inquisitors employed Xenos tech or captured chaos relics that devour secrets in exchange for pieces of the soul. One such artifact is the Throne of Mirrors, a chair lined with psychotropic prisms that reflect a victim's fears until their personality fragments. Each fragment is interrogated separately. The process ends only when all versions of the self agree on the same confession, or when no self remains at all. But perhaps the most horrifying aspect of inquisitorial torture is this: it works. Not in the sense of truth or justice, but in effectiveness. Entire uprisings have been crushed with a single televised execution. Planets have been turned away from heresy with the screams of a single martyr broadcast across the stars. The Inquisition does not need to torture everyone. They only need to torture a few and make sure everyone else listens. In this grim calculus of obedience and fear, the Inquisition thrives. Its dungeons echo with the cries of saints and sinners alike. Its agents walk the line between savior and monster, believing with absolute certainty that their cruelty serves a higher purpose. And in the end, they are right. Because in a galaxy as dark as this, where demons wear human faces and lies birth planets of flame, the only way to find the truth is to break everything else first. There is no morality in the realm of chaos, only hunger, obsession, and the devouring of the self. Pain, in the service of the dark gods, becomes a form of currency, an offering, a weaponized expression of devotion. While the Imperium tortures to control and condemn, chaos tortures to worship. Every scream is a hymn, every mutilation a verse. In the eye of terror and beyond, agony is not a failure of the body. It is the elevation of the soul into something monstrous and divine. Khorne, the blood god, offers a brutal simplicity to his worshippers. To inflict suffering is to grow stronger. But Khorne's pain is not reserved for enemies alone. His followers are expected to prove themselves through sacrifice, ritual combat, self-maiming, and bloodletting that borders on the apocalyptic. Gladiatorial arenas soaked with the blood of the faithful are common, where warriors mutilate themselves before battle to show piety. The most devout carve runes into their own bones, letting each fracture echo with the name of their god. Those who falter in combat are not just defeated, they are torn apart by their brethren, their deaths celebrated as worthy gifts to the throne of skulls. Nurgle, the Lord of Decay, turns pain into an embrace. His followers are infected with diseases that liquefy organs, swell limbs, and melt skin into seeping sludge. But they do not cry out. They laugh. Nurgle's love is suffocating, rotting, all-encompassing. His worshippers endure endless biological agony with smiles sewn into their faces. But this is no release. They are immortal in their decay, each moment a squelching prayer of gratitude, each infection a reminder that they belong to something greater. To suffer for Nurgle is to live forever in the stench of love. Tzeentch, the changer of ways, wields a different kind of torment, madness. His gifts twist the mind until logic becomes agony and truth becomes poison. A follower of Tzeentch might spend years deciphering a single mutating symbol, only to have their brain burst from enlightenment. Others are physically reshaped by his favor, eyes in their stomachs, teeth in their palms, limbs that bend backward and speak in voices they do not recognize. This is not transformation, it is existential torture. Their very identity is flayed, rebuilt, and shattered again. For Tzeentch, the suffering of knowledge is the holiest agony of all. But it is Slaanesh who brings torture to its most horrifying perfection. For the Prince of Excess, pain and pleasure are indistinguishable. The same blade that dismembers also caresses. The same scream of terror can be twisted into ecstasy. Slaanesh's followers are artists of the flesh, sculptors of agony. Skin is stretched into instruments, nerves are tuned to harmonies, and the line between predator and prey dissolves. Victims are not killed quickly. They are transformed into living statues of pain, kept awake by stims and warp song, their minds looping through unbearable sensations for eternity. Their torment is not accidental, it is curated. Chaos champions often wear the marks of their god's favor as living wounds, spines erupting from their backs, faces eternally screaming from their chests, hands that weep blood or laughter. But worse still are the demon hosts and possessed, beings who endure torment not just of the body, but of the soul. Their minds are caged within their own flesh, watching helplessly as their bodies perform atrocities, each act etching a deeper scar into their spiritual being. This is pain beyond comprehension, a metaphysical dismemberment that never ends. Then there are the rituals themselves, acts so vile that even other chaos worshippers avert their eyes. Blood orgies that last for weeks, wherein every scream fuels a warp storm. Rites of despair where the hearts of the faithful are carved out and fed back to them, still beating. torture pits that echo with the moans of 10,000 voices, each one looped through time so that their agony never fades. These aren't isolated acts. They are temples, fortresses, entire worlds devoted to suffering. And yet, within chaos, the most horrifying torture may be the realization that you asked for it. You begged for power, for escape, for meaning, and in return you were broken, twisted, consumed. And you liked it. That is the ultimate cruelty of chaos. It makes you fall in love with your own destruction. There is no safe word in the eye of terror. No mercy, no end. Only the infinite echoing cry of beings who sought freedom and found a god's fingernail raking across the raw meat of their soul. Torture in chaos is not a punishment. It is communion. And when the last shred of you is screaming, begging for death, the gods only smile and offer you eternity. The torture of Slaanesh is unlike anything else in the galaxy. It is not savage like Khorne's nor grotesque like Nurgle's. It is not madness draped in riddles like Tzeentch. It is art. Pure, unspeakable, agonizing art. Slaanesh does not simply seek to hurt. Slaanesh seeks to perfect pain, to elevate it into something so refined, so intimate, so exquisite that it becomes indistinguishable from bliss. In the endless halls of the Dark Prince's domain, agony is an aria, and every soul that enters becomes an instrument. The moment one falls into Slaanesh's grasp, the torment begins, not with whips or knives, but with desire. The victim is made to want, not just food or pleasure, but need on a level so deep it rips their psyche apart. Desire for impossible beauty, unbearable sensations, experiences so vivid they make reality feel like a coffin. This hunger is never fulfilled. Slaanesh offers the promise of satisfaction and then ensures it is always just out of reach. The mind begins to split, clawing at itself, drowning in lust and envy and despair. Then come the symphonies of sensation. Torturers in Slaanesh's courts are not brutes, but artisans. The emperors of pain, the whispered blades, the choir of echoes, each devotee is a master of their craft. Victims are flayed with monomolecular brushes, their nerves restructured into harps. Their screams are captured, tuned, and replayed into their own ears in divine chorus. Pain is layered like music, first sharp, then dull, then lingering. Touch is delivered through warp energy filaments that stimulate individual pain receptors, like keys on a piano. No moment is wasted. Every flick of agony is calculated for emotional depth. There is no death because death is boring. Instead, bodies are sustained through chemdrips, warp infusions, or soul ribbons that bind flesh together long past its natural limit. Some victims are turned into canvases, their skin etched with runes that reshape into new designs every day, searing into their minds. Others become living sculptures, their muscles warped to maintain positions of eternal strain. They can't cry, they can't scream, but inside they beg, until begging itself becomes a form of pleasure. Time distorts in Slaanesh's domain. A second of torment can be stretched into days, each moment slowed to allow the mind to absorb every nuance of pain. And if a victim begins to grow numb, Slaanesh has an answer. Memory flame. The torturer reaches into the soul, removes a moment of joy, and burns it into the nerves. That laugh you once had, it now hurts. That love, it twists your gut. Your happiest moments are weaponized against you, replayed as nightmares made of longing and loss. But the cruelty does not end with the body or soul. It reaches into identity. Some victims are given brief, beautiful reprieves, moments of serenity, visions of lost family, glimpses of themselves whole again. These are false, of course, engineered illusions. And when they are ripped away, the fall is deeper, the pain more profound. One day, a man wakes to find he has been living inside his own corpse for centuries, puppeteered for the pleasure of an audience that no longer remembers his name. The greatest of Slaanesh's tortures, though, is choice. Victims are often allowed to choose their next tormentor, their next device, their next form of pain. But every option is worse than the last. It becomes a cycle of self-betrayal, a descent into self-hate. And worst of all, the victims begin to anticipate the pain. They start to crave it. They sing along with their tormentors. They weep not from agony, but from joy when it begins again. At that point, they are lost. Not because they broke, but because they were remade. The Drukhari, twisted cousins of the Eldari, learned from Slaanesh and then added their own layers of torment. But they are merely echoes. In Slaanesh's palace, torture is not just survival or ritual, it is religion, revelation, transcendence. Pain is not inflicted, it is orchestrated. The goal is not to destroy the victim, the goal is to keep them perfectly broken, dancing forever on the edge of agony and rapture. And somewhere deep within that golden palace, among the silk-draped halls and perfume-suffused screams, there are still some souls who remember who they were. They remember honor, love, peace. They remember what it was like not to hurt. And that memory is the sharpest blade of all. In the depths of Kamara, where light itself dares not linger, the Drukhari rule over a nightmare kingdom built entirely on pain. They are not simply torturers. They are connoisseurs of suffering, artisans of agony, and architects of despair. For the Dark Eldar, torture is not just entertainment, it is sustenance. Their souls, perpetually hunted by Slaanesh, must be fed with pain to avoid being devoured. Every scream they draw, every nerve they shred, is a ward against oblivion. And so they have turned the torment of others into an endless, exquisite performance. The homunculi are the undisputed masters of this dark theater. These ancient flesh sorcerers dwell in the subrealm of Kamara, known as the Dark Gardens, a twisted landscape of organic machines, bone towers, and vats filled with twitching meat. Here they practice the art of vivisection, not as an act of interrogation, but as a form of expression. Victims are not simply cut open, they are sculpted, remade into howling statues of suffering. Limbs are stretched into grotesque arcs, organs are relocated for visual symmetry, and nerves are rewired to turn breathing into agony. This is not a morgue, it is a gallery. There is no death in the Dark City. Victims are kept alive for decades, even centuries, by regenerative serums and arcane biotechnologies. Every time they die, they are resurrected, only to be taken apart again. The homunculi call this perpetual bloom, the flowering of pain that never wilts. Some are turned into living chandeliers, their nerves strung like fiber optic threads, emitting low-frequency wails in response to movement. Others are used as instruments, their vocal cords stretched and tuned so that every scream produces a different note in a symphony of despair. The arenas of Kamara offer another form of torment, spectacle. Gladiators fight not for survival, but for the audience's amusement. Many are drugged to remain conscious even after fatal wounds, so they may feel every drop of blood spill. Some are sewn into each other. 2 or 3 prisoners fused together by biowelds and nerve cables, forced to move in agonizing unison. The crowd roars not for victory, but for creativity. The more unique the torment, the higher the standing of the Archon, who sponsors it. Slaves captured in raids across the galaxy are introduced into this nightmare with a ceremony called the flensing. Stripped of name and history, they are shaved, pierced, and branded. Their skin is peeled in ornate patterns designed to leave vital organs exposed yet undamaged. These open-skinned are made to walk the boulevards of Kamara, while the citizenry plucks at their nerves with electro-whips. Those who survive are given names again, not to honor them, but to mark them as prized specimens. The worst fates, however, are reserved for those who catch the personal interest of a homunculus. Such individuals may be dissected and rebuilt 1,000 times. One infamous victim was turned into a mobile reliquary, his bones hollowed and filled with scented oils, his skin tattooed with every moment of his suffering in microtext. He could not scream anymore. His jaw had been fused into a grin, but his eyes wept blood whenever someone read his story aloud. But it is not only physical pain that the Drukhari master. They are adept at psychological mutilation. Prisoners are isolated in rooms where time flows unevenly. Years pass inside, while mere hours go by outside. They are shown visions of loved ones suffering or betraying them, hallucinations so vivid that reality crumbles. One common torment involves placing victims in simulated escape scenarios, only to have them wake up seconds before freedom, still imprisoned. This is repeated endlessly until hope itself becomes pain. The most perverse invention of the homunculi might be the soul trap maze, a living labyrinth built from fused flesh and bone, pulsing with agony. Victims are placed within and forced to navigate by crawling through the screams of previous prisoners. Every wrong turn results in lashes of soul-draining energy. Some wander for years, their bodies long since broken, their minds reduced to twitching echoes. At the center lies nothing, just a mirror, showing them what they've become. And yet, the true terror of Drukhari torture is not its brutality, it is its intimacy. The The tormentor knows the victim's limits. They learn their memories, their fears, their secrets, and then use them as instruments. A prisoner might be allowed to hear a recording of their child's voice before being skinned alive. Another might be shown a vision of salvation, only for it to dissolve into laughter as the hooks dig in. This is how the Drukhari feed, not just on pain, but on meaningful pain. Suffering that resonates, agony that tells a story. In a universe where death is often quick and meaningless, the Drukhari offer something far worse: significance. And in Kamara, significance means screaming for eternity while someone smiles and takes notes. Torture in Warhammer 40,000 does not end with the death of the body, because death in this universe is a door that opens onto even darker hallways. The soul is not safe, it is not sacred, it is not free. In a galaxy saturated with warp energy and demonic predation, the afterlife is not peace, it is torment. And the most horrifying truth is this: your suffering has only just begun. The warp is a realm of raw emotion given form, a sea of madness, inhabited by predators that do not hunger for flesh but for thought, feeling, essence. When a person dies, their soul is torn from the material realm and cast into the psychic ocean. If unprotected, it is instantly set upon by demons, warp entities, and worse. The process is not annihilation, it is consumption. The soul is devoured piece by piece, thought by thought, memory by memory, each moment stretched out into millennia of spiritual torture. Every mistake you've made is relived, every fear magnified, every regret fed back to you as punishment. But even those protected by psychic wards or religious rites are not immune. The souls of psychers are particularly prized, flavored with power, textured with potential. Black ships ferry them to Terra, where many are sacrificed to the Golden Throne. The Astronomican's constant burn is fueled by 1,000,000 souls a day. Each one is broken apart slowly, fed into the psychic matrix of the Emperor's eternal light. They do not simply vanish. They scream across the stars, their agony echoing in the warp as a chorus of holy despair. Some are bound into weapons, armor, or machines. The Imperium has no qualms about imprisoning souls for eternal service. A demon host, for instance, is a living being bound to a daemon, soul shredded to make room, the remaining essence screaming within, powerless. Servo skulls might retain flickers of the original mind, just enough to remember the pain of decapitation. Some dreadnoughts, half-dead space marines interred in walking sarcophagi, exist in endless stasis, dreaming of the battlefield but feeling every moment of rot in their entombed flesh. And then there are the warp prisons. Realms carved from the warp by powerful entities, often used by the Inquisition or sorcerers to trap souls indefinitely. Here, time does not flow. The soul might be kept in a single second of agony, looped eternally. These prisons are used to contain knowledge, to punish, or simply because the captor can. Some heretics are exiled to these psychic oubliettes, their consciousness forced to replay every betrayal, every failure forever. The traitor legions have their own versions of soul torture. A Chaos Space Marine might entrap an enemy's soul in a gem or blade, using it to fuel sorceries or torment it for personal amusement. The Thousand Sons in particular are infamous for binding souls into spell-engraved stones, using them as power sources, or simply to listen to their endless screams. In these cases, the soul is not destroyed, but compressed, like a mind sealed in a box, unable to sleep, unable to scream, aware of every moment. Even Xenos have mastered this cruel art. The Drukhari use soul prisons to preserve their victims for later. The Harlequin's Black Library holds psychic echoes of long-dead minds, some kept conscious as punishment for failing the Laughing God. The Necrons, especially those of the Cryptek dynasties, have devised ways to digitize souls, converting psychic essence into data, then subjecting it to recursive self-analysis, looping simulations of their own death or failure until identity breaks. Perhaps the most insidious torture beyond death is the slow, methodical stripping of individuality. The Chaos Gods, especially Slaanesh, consume not in bursts but in layers. A soul might retain awareness even as it is absorbed. It watches itself dissolve into a greater whole, its memories stolen and paraded before the godlike trophies. It sees its own thoughts recited by other screaming souls, merged into a cacophony where no single voice can ever be heard again. And for the unlucky few, there is the worst fate of all: to be remembered. To have died, to have screamed, and yet to remain. not in body nor in spirit, but in the minds of those who tormented you. The torturer, the inquisitor, the daemon, they carry fragments of you, parasitic echoes that infect their own dreams. In this way, your torment never truly ends. It loops through their memories, reborn in every act of cruelty they inflict. Your suffering becomes the template for others. In a universe where even the Emperor requires suffering to function, where the warp is a mirror of pain, and where souls can never rest, death is not an escape. It is a continuation of agony by other means. Here, the soul is not sacred. It is just another nerve, waiting to be touched. And in Warhammer 40,000, everything touches. There is a coldness to Necron torture that chills deeper than blood. It is not born of hatred, lust, or vengeance. It is the clinical, indifferent curiosity of beings who have forgotten what it means to feel. And perhaps that is what makes it so terrifying. The Necrons do not scream. They do not gloat. They simply dismantle, observe, and file away the data while you cease to exist in ways you cannot comprehend. The Necron race was once flesh and blood, cursed with short lives under dying stars. They traded their bodies for immortality, uploading their minds into undying metal shells. But in the process, something fundamental was lost. Something human, something real. And yet, a flicker of that ancient pain lingers deep within the most intelligent among them, particularly the cryptex, the techno-sorcerers of their kind. This fragment of memory, of what it was like to suffer, drives them to experiment not out of malice, but nostalgia. They are trying to understand again what pain is by watching others experience it. In the labs of the cryptex, subjects are not flayed or burned. That would be crude. Instead, they are carefully dismantled on a cellular level. Muscles are pulled strand by strand, nerve clusters mapped while still active. Nanoscalpels operate with such precision that the victim remains conscious throughout, their brain preserved in stasis while every part of them is catalogued. There is no screaming. Vocal cords are kept intact, but muted. Their fear is studied, not feared. Their agony is data. Some are not dissected physically, but mentally. The Necrons have devices that can read thoughts in real time, mapping memory patterns through electropsychic resonance. These memories are then isolated, magnified, and played back into the victim's brain at higher and higher emotional frequencies. A childhood fear becomes a god. A moment of shame becomes eternity. This isn't interrogation. It's entrapment in one's worst moments, made vivid beyond sanity. The Flayer virus, a grotesque relic of their Catan masters, is another form of Necron torment, though perhaps one they do not entirely control. Those infected become mindless cannibals, driven by an atavistic need to consume flesh they can no longer digest. Victims of the Flayers are not just eaten. They are disassembled by claw and tooth while still alive, torn limb from limb in acts of slavering, mindless obsession. And sometimes, just sometimes, the victim sees under the madness, sees that somewhere, deep within those glowing red eyes, there's a fragment of a once noble being watching, powerless to stop itself. But the true horror lies in what the Necrons do with the minds they capture. Some victims are digitized, scanned into raw code, and stored within crystalline matrices. These minds remain aware, trapped in endless loops, studied like insects in jars. One might relive their own death 1,000 times, each with slight variations. Another might be forced to converse endlessly with a simulation of themselves, arguing philosophy until their identity unravels. The cryptex call these simulations soul mirrors. They are not mirrors at all. They are prisons. And then there are the canoptech constructs, mechanical monstrosities built from half-memories and recorded behaviors. A victim's thoughts might be implanted into a servitor body, a clanking metal husk made to mimic their former self. They walk, speak, even act like who they once were, but inside there is only horror, a voice screaming in a void while their body acts like a puppet. The Necrons consider this a kind of preservation. The victims call it damnation. Worst of all are the eternity cells. These are not rooms. They are concepts, spatial distortions where time slows to an infinitesimal crawl. A second outside might be a millennium within. And the Necrons use this technology to trap prisoners, keeping them alive for study, their agony stretched across eons. Some are placed inside with nothing but the echo of their own heartbeat. Others are subjected to continuous sensory stimulation, pain, light, sound, carefully modulated to prevent death but deny rest. The soul doesn't break. It erodes. But what chills the blood more than the acts themselves is the fact that the Necrons are not angry. They are not trying to hurt anyone. They are simply curious, detached, clinical. They do not see a human when they dissect you. They see a phenomenon, a pattern. And when they are done, you are erased. Not out of cruelty, but because you are no longer useful. There are no screams in the Necron torture chambers. Only silence, only metal, only eternity. There is a brutal honesty to orc torture, a primitive, almost laughable simplicity that somehow makes it all the more horrific. The orcs are not subtle. They don't use psychic torment, delicate knives, or mind-altering rituals. They use their fists, their boots, their crude tools and cruder minds. But make no mistake, just because it's stupid doesn't mean it's not horrifying. In fact, for the victims, it is precisely the joy orcs take in the suffering of others that makes it so unbearable. Orc torture is entertainment. It's a form of sport, a communal pastime. There is no ideology behind it, no religious justification or higher purpose. They do it because they think it's funny. And that laughter, the roaring, snot-spraying, side-splitting laughter of 1,000 green beasts, is what breaks the mind. Because when you're tied up in a pit, bleeding from every orifice, and they're laughing like children at a puppet show, you realize your pain is their plaything. One of the orcs' favorite games is squig insertion, where they force-feed squigs, living, biting, parasitic creatures, into every orifice of a prisoner, just to see what happens. They bet on how long it'll take for the squig to chew its way out. Sometimes they let the victim run a short distance before releasing a hungry mob of squigs after them, filming the whole thing on ramshackle mech cams. It's a game, a joke, a horror show. Limb removal is another classic, not surgically, not cleanly, just raw yanking, sometimes with chains and grots pulling on opposite ends. Then they reattach the limbs, wrong, backwards, or with metal replacements they made from scrap and squig parts. They call it mech surgery. To the orcs, it's a chance to test their tinkering skills. To the victim, it's a carnival of agony. If a prisoner proves tough, they become a long-term toy. Orcs will brand them with glyphs, carve graffiti into their skin, dress them in ridiculous outfits, and parade them around camp like mascots. They might even force them to fight in the pits, unarmed, starving, wounded, just to watch them get pulped by giant orc bosses. Or worse, they arm them just enough to make the fight interesting, maybe even winnable, before flooding the arena with angry squigs or detonating a bomb collar. Gretchen and snotlings sometimes get involved too. These smaller orcoid creatures are even more creative in their pettiness. They invent little games, like poke and squeal, where the goal is to get the prisoner to squeal in the funniest voice. Or grot dentist, where they remove teeth with rocks, only to glue them back in upside down. But the psychological side of orc torture is where it turns from slapstick into something far darker. Orcs don't just hurt their prisoners, they mock them. They imitate their screams. They pretend to cry. They act out skits of the victim's last moments before capture, turning tragedy into theater. And they never let the prisoner forget. This is all meaningless. There's no ideology, no purpose, just fun. Imagine being stripped of all dignity, surrounded by creatures who view your agony as a party. Imagine realizing that nothing you say, no plea, no scream will ever register as anything but punchline material. There is no empathy, no understanding, just grins full of tusks and hands too eager to pull things apart. And for those particularly unlucky, the orcs might decide to make them into part of their war machine. Mechs love using prisoners in their contraptions. A human might be strapped to the side of a kilocan, their lungs helping pump the engine. Others are used as living shock absorbers, crammed inside armor plating and screamed at whenever the engine stalls. There's even reports of entire dreadnoughts built around still living prisoners. Their exposed faces stretched in silent screams while orcs cheer them on from below. But the true final horror of orc torture is that they forget. You could be in agony for days, weeks, screaming your lungs out, and then an orc just wanders off because he got bored. Or he sees a shinier explosion. You are left, bleeding, mangled, broken, and unnoticed, because to them, your suffering wasn't even memorable. There's something uniquely cruel about being tortured not by evil, but by stupidity, by glee, by the idiotic, grinning, grease-stained glee of creatures who see you as no more than a balloon full of red paint. And when the laughter fades, and you're alone in the pit with the echoes still ringing in your ears, you realize the truth. The orcs didn't try to break you. They didn't even care. And somehow that's the worst torture of all. There is no sadist behind Tyrannid torture. No gloating daemon, no cackling warlord, no whispering inquisitor. And that's what makes it so terrifying. The Tyrannids are not evil. They're not even angry. They don't torture out of hatred. They do it because it's efficient. Because your pain, your fear, your every twitching nerve is simply useful. The hive mind is an unfathomable intelligence, alien in the truest sense. It sees all biological life as biomass, raw material to be harvested, recycled, repurposed. But the harvesting is not immediate. First, it studies, it learns, and in that learning lies the horror. Because the Tyrannids probe their prey. They analyze what makes you suffer, not to punish, but to improve the next iteration of their living weapons. Your screams are part of the data. When the Tyrannids descend on a planet, they don't simply overrun it. They send vanguard organisms, lictors, genostealers, brainleech spores, to capture and study the dominant species. These victims are taken alive, cocooned in mucus and muscle, and brought to bioships where the real torment begins. The victim is restrained, flooded with neurotoxins that keep them conscious but paralyzed. Every biological system is examined. Blood composition, organ function, skeletal resilience, emotional response. Pain thresholds are pushed, not to break the victim, but to calibrate a weapon. Organs are removed and regrown, sometimes multiple times, just to test the regenerative limits of the host. Joints are hyperextended, then reset. Neural pathways are exposed and stimulated with electrochemical pulses, allowing the hive mind to see which pain receptors are most effective in disrupting enemy morale. In one instance, a victim had their entire nervous system removed and suspended in a nutrient bath while it was stimulated independently. It did not die. It could not. Tyrannid biovessels are not ships, they are digestive systems. Inside, prisoners are kept in pulsing chambers that flood with digestive mist, dissolving flesh at a molecular level while keeping the brain alive as long as possible. This is not waste. The brain, the fear, the suffering, these feed synaptic relays, strengthening the hive mind's signal. The more you hurt, the smarter it gets. And then there is the psychic smothering. Even if you escape the tendrils of a lictor or the claws of a carnifex, the hive mind itself bears down on your mind like an avalanche. It suffocates thought. Hope becomes a memory. Emotions turn sour. Some describe it as feeling like they are drowning in someone else's thoughts. Others say it is like screaming in a room where no one can hear you, because your voice is no longer yours. The shadow in the warp erases individuality, devours courage, and replaces it with cold, primal terror. When genostealer cults infest a planet, they soften the prey first. Psychological manipulation, social corrosion, and biological conditioning prepare the population for their own destruction. Victims willingly walk into the arms of their devourers, singing praises to the gods they think will liberate them. And in the final hours, as the sky goes dark and the spores fall like rain, those same victims watch their families dragged into digestion pools, still under the illusion that this is salvation. That betrayal, the moment when belief turns to terror, is as much a tool as any claw. Tyrannids do not let souls rest. Though they have no use for the soul in the religious sense, they trap psychic echoes, residual thought patterns of particularly powerful psychers or defiant minds. These echoes are caged within synaptic nodes, used to stimulate or counter enemy defenses in future invasions. To be devoured by the hive mind is not to vanish, it is to be subsumed. Pieces of your consciousness live on, not as ghosts, but as programming. And for those who somehow survive, there is another fate. Victims of partial digestion often come back changed. Their skin carries hive spores. Their dreams are filled with hissing voices. They can no longer bond with other humans. They describe a longing for something vast, something waiting. These are not mutations. These are seeds. The hive mind doesn't always kill. Sometimes it leaves a mark, like a fingerprint on the soul. This is the cruelty of the Tyrannids. Not their violence, not their claws or fangs, but their absolute indifference. You are not an enemy. You are not a heretic. You are not even prey. You are material, a pattern of protein, a signal to be cataloged. Your pain is valuable. Your fear is instructive. Your death is not the end. It is only one more line in an endless, perfect equation. And when they are done with you, they will forget you, because the hive mind does not need to remember. It already knows everything you were, and everything you could never survive becoming. There is no flesh being flayed, no visible chains or blood-soaked chambers. And yet, among the Eldari, torture takes on a form so subtle, so refined, that it surpasses all crude physicality. Their agony is not one of torn limbs or broken bones. It is the slow erosion of spirit, the psychic unraveling of identity. It is the torment of memory, of fate, of watching your entire civilization collapse and knowing it was your own fault. The Eldari are a race haunted by guilt on a cosmic scale. They did not merely lose a war or fall to external invaders, they birthed a god of depravity, Slaanesh, through their own decadence. The fall was not an invasion, it was an implosion, an act of civilizational suicide so catastrophic that it tore a hole in reality and damned most of their race to soul annihilation. This trauma is not past tense, it is present, it is everywhere, and it tortures them daily. To survive, the Craftworld Eldari employ soulstones, psychic containers that capture the spirit upon death, preventing it from being devoured by Slaanesh. But even in life, the awareness of that danger is ever present. Every action is measured, every pleasure is feared. They live lives of asceticism because any emotional indulgence could make them vulnerable. It's like walking through fire while soaked in oil, knowing a single misstep will ignite your soul for eternity. This self-denial is torture. But worse is the path system, socially enforced roles that dictate one's behavior and thought to avoid emotional instability. An Eldari becomes a warrior, a seer, an artisan, and is expected to embody that identity completely until they must switch. It's a survival mechanism, but also a psychological prison. Imagine being forced to amputate your own dreams, to cut away pieces of yourself, just to remain intact. Over time, you don't know who you are. You only know the masks, and then there are the seers, the farseers and warlocks who glimpse the strands of fate. Their curse is unique. They see the doom of their people. Over and over, in 1,000 futures, the Eldari die. No matter what path is taken, no matter what sacrifice made, extinction always looms. And yet they continue, guiding their people through a maze with no exit, praying for the one improbable future that might offer something more. That knowledge that the end is inevitable, that every friend, every child, every hope will fall, is an agony no blade could rival. The Exodites suffer differently. They live on death worlds, clinging to primal spirituality to stay distant from the temptations of their fallen kin. But their lives are ones of endless vigilance, of constant deprivation. They watch their children die from harsh environments, knowing that softening would mean damnation. Their torture is one of silence, of a slow, patient starvation of the soul in exchange for a distant promise of survival. The Harlequins are perhaps the most cursed of all. These servants of the laughing god must perform the fall over and over, immortalizing their people's shame in acrobatic tragedy. They relive the moment of annihilation through dance, through theater, through mask and blade. Each time they perform, they are psychically connected to the audience, forcing everyone to feel the fall anew. It is not storytelling, it is forced remembrance. A species keeping its own trauma alive because forgetting would mean repeating it. Even success brings no comfort. Eldari who become too powerful, those who master their path, often risk becoming trapped by it. The path of the warrior, for example, can lead to the formation of an exarch, an individual so consumed by their role that their soul fuses with the armor, a composite being of many minds, no longer truly themselves. Immortality through spiritual self-erasure. What could be more tragic? Then there are those who fall. The Eldari who turn to Slaanesh, becoming Drukhari, or worse, those who try to balance between. Their torment is the most paradoxical. They must forget to survive, forget pain, guilt, love. They numb themselves through cruelty, detachment, and artifice. But deep within, the truth gnaws. What they've become, what they've lost. They laugh louder, cut deeper, fly faster, just to drown out the sound of their soul cracking. And for the Inari, who embrace death itself as salvation, the torture lies in proximity. They draw power from the moment of dying, from the breath between life and oblivion. They carry death within them like a lantern, and with each use, they step closer to becoming the very oblivion they hope to control. For the Eldari, there are no iron chains. There's only destiny, memory, loss, and a whispering God that waits behind every heartbeat. Their torture is not what is done to them. It is what they remember, what they feel, what they cannot forget. They are a species carved from sorrow, and every moment they continue to exist is an act of sheer, beautiful, unbearable defiance. In the grim darkness of the far future, torture is not merely a punishment, it is a language. Every major faction in Warhammer 40,000 speaks it fluently, though with different accents, different rituals, different cruelties. But taken together, these torments form a portrait of the galaxy itself. A culture of agony so all-consuming, so normalized, that it no longer even calls itself cruel. It simply is. And that may be the most terrifying truth of all. Across the Imperium, pain is sanctified, not questioned, not hidden. From the Ecclesiarchy's flaming pyres to the Inquisition's mind-scouring chambers, suffering is a civic virtue. Children grow up hearing the screams of the penitent. Soldiers carry relics made from tortured saints. To hurt is to be faithful. To endure is to be human. And over generations, that idea becomes doctrine. Doctrine becomes dogma, and dogma becomes civilization. A place where a man might die 1,000 deaths and still be considered lucky to serve. Chaos, for all its madness, is no different. Its tortures are simply louder, more vivid, more extreme. But the same principles apply. Pain is identity. Suffering is devotion. The dark gods do not force mortals to twist themselves. They invite them, offer power in exchange for blood, whisper promises in the screams of others, and mortals answer, gladly. In this way, torture becomes not just a practice but a relationship between the god and the servant, between the knife and the soul. The Xenos races too embed pain into their essence. The Drukhari make torture into theater. The Necrons render it into data. The Orcs giggle as they break bones like toys. And the Tyranids reduce it to raw efficiency. But in every case, the victim is not just destroyed, they are used. Their agony is a means to an end, entertainment, evolution, spiritual fuel. Suffering has become a resource, and the galaxy is very, very good at harvesting it. Even those who oppose torture become part of the system. The Eldari resist, restrain, and remember, but their entire society is still shaped around the trauma of their fall. Their suffering is internalized, ritualized, folded into every breath they take. The Tau, who claim to follow the greater good, are not above brainwashing, re-education, and the psychic sedation of dissent. Every faction, every ideology bends toward the same gravitational well, control through pain. Why? Because in the 41st millennium, pain works. It breaks minds, it breaks rebellions, it creates order. And when order fails, it at least leaves silence. This is not a place where Geneva Conventions ever existed. It is not a place of rights, or empathy, or rehabilitation. This is a place where a cry for mercy is more likely to be met with amusement than compassion, where the line between justice and sadism is not just blurred, it has been erased entirely. And the most horrifying part is that no one questions it anymore. Pain is so normalized, so expected that its absence feels unnatural. A hive city without screams is a dead hive. A chaos shrine without flayed skin is a failure. A dark Eldar Colosseum without agony is a ghost town. The galaxy feeds on torment. It needs it. To feel. To survive. To believe. The real question is not who tortures whom, but rather who doesn't. And the answer is no one. Not truly. Not when survival demands sacrifice, and sacrifice demands suffering. Even the heroes are not innocent. Space Marines train through pain. Commissars inspire through fear. Even the Emperor himself, the god of mankind, rests on a throne built atop the continuous psychic agony of 10,000 souls a day. The greatest beacon of hope in the galaxy runs on torture. So what is left then? Is there anything in this universe untouched by the rot of normalized cruelty? Perhaps only the dead, and even they are not safe. Warhammer 40,000 does not offer happy endings. It does not promise redemption. It offers only a mirror. A dark, cracked mirror reflecting our deepest fears, our ugliest impulses. And in that reflection, we see not monsters, but ourselves. Because in the end, torture is not the exception in this galaxy. It is the rule. The system, the culture. And that might be the greatest horror of all. Hope is a cruel thing in the 41st millennium. It survives like a flickering candle in a hurricane of blood, each moment of light more painful than the darkness that surrounds it. For all the physical agonies described, the chains, the blades, the warp-born madness, none compare to the deepest torture of all. Hope itself. Because in a galaxy this cruel, hope is not just elusive, it's a trap. Imagine a soldier on some forgotten world, watching the sky burn with the descent of a tyrannid hive fleet. He fights with broken bones, with half a lung, because he believes reinforcements are coming. He believes that the Emperor sees him, that survival is possible. And then, when the last wall falls, and the sky opens not with salvation, but with a gaping alien maw, his mind collapses. Not from pain, not from death, but from the realization that his hope was the greatest lie of all. That is how the Imperium survives. By weaponizing hope, propaganda, faith, the idea that loyalty, sacrifice, and suffering mean something. That dying on your knees in some sludge trench matters because the Emperor loves you. But the truth is darker. The Emperor does not see. He cannot see. He is a shattered god, chained to a throne of agony, whose continued existence demands the constant torment of others. The faith that sustains humanity is built atop screaming souls and forgotten truths. Even the Inquisition, for all its ruthlessness, relies on the lie of hope. Every confession, every broken mind is driven by the belief that obedience might spare the soul. That truth can cleanse, that repentance means mercy. But it never does. Most who confess still die. Most who die are still declared guilty. And those who are spared are often left hollow, their minds scrubbed, their memories shattered. They are free, yes, but they are no longer themselves. Chaos offers another kind of hope, a seductive one. Power, pleasure, freedom from the tyranny of a dying imperium. But the price is worse than death. The gods of chaos offer gifts, not because they care, but because they feed on hope. Slaanesh thrives on the ecstasy of promise. Khorne delights in the belief that strength will bring peace. Nurgle tempts with the comfort of acceptance. And Tzeentch, he is hope incarnate, ever shifting, ever lying, always just one more deal away from glory. Hope is the carrot before the lash. The illusion of light at the end of a tunnel that only leads deeper into the dark. Even the Xenos are not immune. The Eldari hope for survival, but know, deep in their hearts, that their race is dying. That every victory is temporary. That every child born is one step closer to extinction. The Tau speak of the greater good, a unified vision of peace and progress. But beneath that rhetoric lies control, censorship, and the reprogramming of dissenters. Their hope is a dream so fragile it must be enforced with silence. The Necrons hoped once for immortality, for perfection, and now they are shadows of themselves, tortured not by others but by their own choices. They don't even feel the pain anymore, just the cold, just the memory of what they were. And then there are the Space Marines, icons of glory, warriors of legend. Each indoctrinated from youth with the hope that they are humanity's saviors. But the truth is, they are tools, engineered weapons. Their lives are war, their deaths are expected. And their legacy, if it survives at all, is propaganda for the next generation of child soldiers to chase until they too are burned out and buried under rubble. What makes this torture worse than all others is its persistence. Pain ends, flesh breaks, minds snap, but hope clings. Even as the executioner raises the blade, even as the daemon bites into the soul, even as the Necron digitizes the mind for eternity, hope says, maybe someone will save you. Maybe this pain means something. Maybe it was not all for nothing. And that is the deepest cut. Because when that hope dies, when the final realization comes that no one is coming, that nothing will change, that this is all there is, that is when the soul truly breaks. That is when the silence is complete. And yet, people still hope. Maybe that's the final cruelty of Warhammer 40k. That despite it all, despite the chains, the blades, the screaming stars, and soul-consuming gods, something inside us still clings to the idea that it might get better. That there is something more. That flickering, shivering candle. And that, dear viewer, is why this universe is the darkest one imaginable. Because it knows and uses the one thing we can never quite let go of. Hope. If you made it this far through the nightmare, consider subscribing to the channel. We dive deep into the hidden horrors and brilliant tragedies of Warhammer 40k every week. Let's explore the grimdark together, because even in the darkest future imaginable, you're not alone in wondering, why does it hurt so much?